Hello friends! As we continue to cheer Commander Abhilash Tommy's exploits, we also hail the fantastic feat of INSV Tarini crew who etched another memorable mark in ocean sailing. Earlier this week, INSV Tarini returned home after having traversed 17,000 nautical miles transoceanic intercontinental voyage in 188 days from Goa to Rio de Janeiro via Cape Town and back. Stay tuned for an exclusive interaction with Captain Dilip Donde at the end of episode 2 of Maritime Conversations.
Welcome to the second episode of Maritime Conversations. I'm Swaroop Anand. I'm here with Commodore Dr. Shrikant Keshnur, Vijay Medal. Welcome, Commodore Keshnur. The last episode you had mentioned about the the sailing and history of sailing with the Indian Navy. Let's talk about that. You said there's a background to it, so let's unpack that.
Yeah, I mean the history would probably go too long.
Sure.
But I can give some part of the background, and there is an immediate past background and there is a longer background.
Okay.
So first let me try and give you the immediate past background. Abhilash Tommy's success has to be seen in the perspective of certain energies that were unleashed in the Navy,
Right.
in the early part of this century, so I would say. And the person behind that in many ways is India's great sailing visionary, Admiral, Vice Admiral MP Avati.
Right.
MP Avati is a man of many parts and we will probably talk about him independently.
We should.
But essentially he was a guy who thought about sailing in a big way. His imagination was that an Indian sailor should go around the world solo.
Right.
And he had been pursuing that dream relentlessly for several years, running into walls, trying to persuade the authorities. So in around 2004 or 5 he got the go ahead when Admiral Arun Prakash was the Navy chief.
Sure, yeah.
Another great visionary. So Admiral Arun Prakash got the go ahead, and that's what sort of kick-started the process or giving impetus to the process of sending a sailor around the world. Now the first person who answered Admiral Avati's call to this was Commander Dilip Donde.
Right.
And Dilip Donde, actually frankly, as he says himself, he had not done much of ocean sailing, but he too had this gene in him, the madman gene, as you can say, the quest for adventure, the love for solitude, the DIY sort of skill, and he volunteered.
Right.
And the Navy picked him up. He was sent abroad to train with Sir Robert Johnston, who was the first person to sort of solo circumnavigate the world in GGR to 1968.
Right.
So Dilip did that and came back, and in 2009 he was the first Indian to solo circumnavigate the world.
Right.
He did that on a vessel called the Madhe. Again, the name was chosen by Admiral Avati after a river in
The
Goa.
Mandovi
Yeah,
river of
the tributary of sorts of Mandovi. Now, interestingly, Dilip could probably also have done it non-stop, but I think there was a certain amount of conservatism at that time,
Right.
which thought that he must go stopping at various places. So he did 4 or 5 stops, and then, of course, immediately after that, the good thing that the Navy did was put Abhilash Tommy as his understudy when he was doing the
Right.
preparation.
Right.
So Abhilash Tommy was involved right through Dilip's voyage, and as soon as Dilip Donde came back,
Right.
he handed over Madai to him, saying, "All yours," in a manner of sort of handing over the way we do in the Navy.
Right.
And then Tommy went, like a good shishya of his guru, went one step ahead by doing solo circumnavigation non-stop.
Right.
So Dilip Donde gets the status of being the pioneer.
Yeah.
Avati is the great sailing visionary.
Right.
And then of course Tommy did his first one during 2013.
Right.
And then that led the Navy to try one with women officers. And then that's why while these two were called Sagar Parikrama 1 and Sagar Parikrama 2, you had the Navika Sagar Parikrama
Right.
with 6 women officers
Right.
and 6 very again deep selected from several who volunteered. They were trained. Dilip Donde trained them.
Right.
They did shorter passages and ultimately they were ready and they were flagged off in 2017 September, I think, and they finished in 2018.
Right.
So 6 women officers, again that was fantastic, brilliant effort.
Right.
You know, so now you had 8 sailors,
Right.
so to say, in the solo circumnavigation club, and that's a big achievement because from not a single one in a span of a decade you had 8.
Right.
So I think that is what gave a huge sort of recognition and impetus to ocean sailing.
Right.
So the credit should go to Avati, it should go to Admiral Arun Prakash, Dilip Donde, Abhilash Tommy, the 6 women officers led by Lieutenant Commander Vartika Joshi.
That's right.
There is one silent name in all this, the ship builder.
Right.
Admiral Avati was keen that the ship be built in India.
Right.
Incidentally, the ship that sailed around the world first time, Sohaili, was also built in India,
That's
in
right.
Bombay.
Yeah, Robert
Very
Knox.
interesting trivia.
Yeah. The Royal Bombay Yacht Club, I
Yes,
think, was
it had a hand in
instrumental.
it.
Yeah.
It had a hand in it. Avati and Dilip and all chose, and a person who answered their call was a very unassuming, wonderful person called Ratnakar Dandekar.
Right.
And Ratnakar Dandekar has a shipbuilding yard in Goa.
That's right.
And he had never done this before, but he too took up the challenge and then built the Madhei,
Right.
which did these 2 successful voyages. He built the Tarini, on which the women officers went. So you can actually call the first 2 Sagar Parikramas as a story of 4 men and a boat. Avati,
Right.
Donde, Abhilash Tommy and Ratnakar Dandekar.
Right.
So that is in some ways the let's say the immediate background to the sailing story.
Right.
But then it has a deeper background, and it depends upon how much you want to go.
So, 4 men and a boat,
Yeah.
like you said. I remember reading Commander Tommy's book, 151 Days, and in that it says, Made, 1 boat, many oceans. With that, let's unpack a little more. I'm really, interested to understand what is the, the larger background that you have for us.
Yeah, since you mentioned Tommy's 151 Days, I must also recommend to our listeners Dilip Donde's book called The First Indian.
Right.
That's been published by the Maritime History Society. And I think
Also
people should-
a baby of Admiral
Avati in many
Right.
ways. And we'll talk about Avati, we'll talk about the Maritime History Society. We have a lot of things to talk.
Right.
So to come back, I think while enormous energies were unleashed, as I say, on the ocean sailing front in the last 20 years, the story goes back sometime to the 80s.
Right.
Now remember, of course, that the Indian Navy in many ways, with its immediate past predecessor being the Royal Indian Navy, at certain point of time sailing was important. Those who trained under the Royal Indian Navy did a lot of sailing,
Right.
and indeed rowing and pulling on those old fashioned whalers and boats.
Yeah.
But over a period of time, as we consolidated after independence, probably, I say this probably because we are still not much sure in terms of accounts available, but as we got into consolidation, as initially there were smaller ships,
Sure.
sailing, whether competitive sailing or ocean sailing, for a first couple of decades probably was not very much prominent.
Okay.
But we soon started to get, by 70s, 80s, started to get very good in competitive sailing
Right.
at the international Asian level, and we have produced lots of sailors, very good sailors. We got Mongia, Commodore Mongia, his 2 children, Ashim and Nitin, also became good sailors.
Right.
You had Farooq Tarapur, you had
Sure.
Kelly Rao, you had Homi Motiwala, Pushpendra Garg, Mahesh Ramachandran. Lots of people we produced, and I'm just sort of taking. You had I think Gautam Datta. I mean, you had Shakil Kudroli. So you had lots of people who did well in competitive sailing at about the Asian level,
Right.
and did well in several world tournaments. However, that did not include ocean sailing for a long time. Now, in 1988, the Navy's first ocean sailing round the world expedition happened, which was led by Commander Vijay Vadhera.
Right.
He is prominent in the Navy Foundation Mumbai circuit, very, very active. So he was a skipper for this round the world.
Right.
So that had multiple stops and multiple crew. But in some ways that was, you can say, the first effort by the Navy
Right.
on a yacht called the Samudra.
Right.
And then of course Samudra subsequently did smaller oceanic passages. Thereafter the Navy invested at about the same time and thereafter in what is called the sail training ships.
Sure.
So you had Varuna,
Right.
the sail training ship in the 80s, and then later on you had Tarangini and Sudarshini.
Got it.
Now the interesting thing about Tarangini and Sudarshini is that they are a part of the first training
Training
squadron.
squadron, right.
So the cadets ab initio training now for our cadets happens, which involves a lot of time spent on sail training ships.
Wow. So this is right out of Naval Academy.
After they finish the Naval Academy
Right.
and join the first training squadron in Kochi, so they join, which the first training squadron consists of Tir and other ships which
Sure.
are part of the squadron.
Right.
So while they are there, as a part of their 6 months there, they also spend dedicated time, maybe a month, maybe 2, whatever,
Right.
on the sail training ships and sail on the sail training ships.
Right.
So that's a huge difference. It was not there in our time.
Yeah, I mean, you graduated in the mid 80s, and
Yeah.
you were commissioned in 86.
Yes.
Did you have a chance to?
No, we didn't. In 85 autumn,
Yeah.
when we were cadets on the INS Bias,
Right.
it was largely whaler sailing. And whaler sailing is not only sort of manually tough. It takes a lot of time to rig and unrig the boats, but also even the cat's paw exercise. There's an exercise called cat's paw when you are let on a whaler and you are in the open seas.
Right.
The ship is next to you, but you didn't have this sort of exposure that the cadets now have.
Right.
It was very limited, and the resources were limited that time. So I can't complain. We were a part of a growing Navy, but I really envy cadets today who have dedicated sail training ships. They do dedicated sailing. In fact, there are often foreign cadets who come on exchange programs on this
Sure,
ship.
yeah.
So it's a whole different ball game together.
Right.
I mean, for example, the Tarangini was there in London
Right.
on the 75th anniversary Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. I
Yeah.
mean, what a fantastic way,
Right.
to send our sail training ship there.
Right.
So in many ways, it's a very different Navy, a very vibrant, a more advanced, more forward-looking Navy now
Right.
than before, and I envy the cadets. But yes, I think over last 40 years, cumulatively these steps have given a huge fillip to ocean sailing.
Lovely. So this was about the past. What does the future hold, Commodore? Exciting stuff, I presume. You have, of course, the Indian Navy doing a lot for sailing. Apart from the other things that the Navy is doing, are there other organizations, anything outside of the Indian Navy with respect to sailing happening in India?
Yeah, I mean, I see these as two questions
Right,
in one,
yeah.
and I'll try to answer them accordingly.
Yeah.
What does the future hold? I think by nature I'm optimistic always, and I think the future is bright. I'm given to understand that the next thing that's being planned
Right.
is probably a women officer going solo circumnavigation.
Yeah.
If that is so, it's great, and I believe that some training is
we've
happening.
read that.
In any case, the Navy is doing a fair bit of ocean sailing, partial passages, say from Goa to the Cape, from there to Brazil. They were recently a part of this race.
Right.
So now there are lots of ocean sailing races involving ocean crossings or smaller distances, but still considerably tough and presenting all the problems that such races have.
Right.
So the Navy has done an excellent thing by opening something called the ocean sailing node in Goa, and I think at this moment they have 6 sail training vessels, there are 6 smaller vessels
Okay.
on which you, so you have lot more people taking to ocean sailing now than before, and I hope that momentum is sort of sustained.
Right.
What is also necessary to understand, as you sort of brought out, yes, the Navy is doing a lot, but if we really want to leverage, so to say, Tommy's success,
Right.
the question to ask is, can we make this the 1983 movement for our sailing?
Sure.
For-
1983 pretty much brought cricket to the forefront. Of,
yes, yes.
the-
It sort of completely changed the paradigm.
Sure.
It-
Sure.
So can this be done with sailing? Now, of course, sailing is not that way a spectator sport like
Yeah.
cricket. So yes, there might be certain constraints there. But as we saw during Tommy's race, it can be tactically thrilling.
Yeah.
You can analyze it a great way. There's a lot of romance that you can bring about it. And it is also about connect to the world of oceans. So I believe it's a question of how you can imagine. And there I believe that what we need to do is what I call the whole of nation approach.
Right.
I think Tommy has done his bit, the Indian Navy has done his bit and is doing its bit. But we need the rest of maritime, all those involved in the maritime, community,
Sure.
whether it's the merchant marine, the coast guard, the other agencies, to have a buy-in, the various sailing associations, and there are lots of sailing associations all over the country, to have a buy-in in ocean sailing, to do lot more of that, because the more you democratize the space,
Yep.
it can actually become cheaper and less elite,
Right.
and therefore accessible to others. From there, I think we also need to popularize the concept of waterfront sports. You need to have more marinas. Probably the government should think of maritime infrastructure,
Yep.
marinas, things like that, where people should be able to take a boat out for a spin or a ride, as you would take your car out and say, let's go for a drive.
Yeah.
So that should be the sort of thing. I mean, places like Bombay, places like Goa, places like Andaman should have a lot more of ocean sports or waterfront sports than currently obtains. Above all, I think there should be place in popular culture for sporting icons. You hear our maritime heroes, whether they are in the conceptual, intellectual, economic, infrastructure front or sporting event, don't have the same kind of recognition. They don't have the same kind of iconic status as people say in cricket or tennis or badminton have.
Right.
But in the manner, for example, Neeraj Chopra changed the paradigm again in Olympic athletics.
Yep.
It is possible if popular culture took note. If the media, for example, followed Abhilash Tommy, there's
Right.
lots of success. You make movies on him, you write,
Yeah.
you create documentaries, you write books, you create comic characters.
Right.
There's sky is the limit in what you can do.
Yeah.
And you sort of reach this message out through maritime education to young children. I think maritime needs to figure much more in popular culture and popular consciousness.
Right.
I think in some ways that will be the biggest tribute we can pay to Manohar Awati,
Yeah.
and the best legacy of Abhilash Tommy's victory would be that.
Right, right. Super. So that brings us to the end of the second episode of Maritime Conversations. See you.
Hi, this is Kirti Tejas, and I'm in Goa today with Captain Dilip Donde, our pioneer in the Indian Ocean sailing scene. Thank you, sir, for agreeing to meet with me at such short notice, and thank you, Sucheta ma'am, for being here with us. Thank you so much. And he has kindly agreed to talk to us about his experience as the first circumnavigator from India. So, sir, you did your first solo circumnavigation when you were still in the Navy in 2009. What is your experience and what are the challenges? I'm sure there were many. So, could you just tell us something about your challenges?
So when Admiral Auti came up with this idea of solo circumnavigation by an Indian, that was way back in 2006, and we didn't have a clue how to go about it. We were lucky to meet Sir Robin Knox Johnston, the first person to have sailed solo and non-stop around the world.
Wow.
And he took me under his wing, and that is how I learned what was required to be done.
Wow.
And as things were not difficult enough, Admiral Auty ratcheted up the degree of difficulty by saying that the boat had to be built in India. So now we had to build a boat in India, and then I was going to be the obvious guinea pig to be sailing. So yeah, so that is how the whole thing started. And we really didn't have, I mean, we got an excellent boat builder, but this was the first sailboat he was building. So we are all in completely uncharted waters. By the time I finished in 2010, we had gathered enough experience, and that's how we decided to take on the next challenge, that is to do the non-stop circumnavigation. And Abhilash was
Right, you trained him and also the 6 girls who
yes,
went.
so I started with Abhilash. Abhilash did his non-stop circumnavigation, and Admiral Auty, always 2 steps ahead of everyone, said now we should do a women's circumnavigation.
Wow.
And that is how
He
the
had
women's
his
circumnavigation.
foresight.
Yes.
Right.
And yeah, so those 3 circumnavigations finished in 2018. Till 2010, there was no Indian who had done a circumnavigation.
Now we
By
have
2018, we had 8. And now Abhilash has done it twice, so we have 9 circumnavigations done by Indians.
Right. So now, following up to what you said about Commander Tommy, he recently was part of the Golden Globe race, and he came second in the second place. But obviously, given it's the sailing race, I mean, the fact that he completed that race was something that has made India also aware of the scene, as is Tarini, which was received yesterday on the 23rd by our Honorable Minister, Smriti Irani. So, from 2009 to 2023, I'm sure there has been a lot of difference in the way sailing has actually changed or evolved, if I can say that. So, what are your thoughts on?
So it is, as I see it, it is changed for the better. There is a lot of progress. When I started my trip, people were quite convinced that I am not going to come back alive. When Abhilash did his trip, people were skeptical about him doing it non-stop, some of them. But there was no doubt that he will finish the trip. It is sort of an evolution of the establishment also, that from a mindset where this cannot be done by an Indian to what's the big deal, they've done another circumnavigation. That I think is a compliment to the project.
Right.
So that's a good part of it. People get complacent because 3 circumnavigations have been done without any major incident, without any rescue required, without any accident. Sometimes I get a feeling that people think that ye to ho jayega. What's the big deal? It's easy. It is not. The movement, and that's the nature of the beast, the sea. The moment you let your guard down, the sea gets back at you and teaches you a lesson you'll never forget.
Right.
So I think we need to keep that in mind too.
Right. I think it's a big lesson that we need to be on our toes all the time when we are at sea. Also, sir, after you've retired, you are still sailing. You mentioned you have sailed more than what you did before you circumnavigated. You have also started this initiative where you take people like us, lay people who are not connected to the sea in either in professional life or personal. You take us out on your ship, on your boat, sailboat Antara. So how has that experience been for you? How do you see it?
So I retired from the Navy. I took premature retirement from the Navy. I did not retire from sailing.
Right.
I took premature retirement from the Navy.
We are
So I
glad.
took sailing.
We are glad.
In 2018, we bought this boat Antara. Till then, I mean, after my circumnavigation and publishing of my book and all that. Whenever I go for a talk to people, I tell people to, encourage them to come to see and all. And a lot of people would come to me and tell me that, okay, you sold us on the idea of going to sea. Now tell us, how do we do it? We are not in the Navy, we are not in the military. And I realized that there was no option available to them in India, unless they, flew down to Europe or Thailand or somewhere and, paid a lot of money. So we bought Antara, we got her ready. So Cheta and I, we work on the boat, we don't have any employees. And we said that we will give this experience to anyone who wants to sail. And that is what we do. Sail along the west coast of India. We are licensed to sail anywhere in the world. We are the only boat of our kind registered with DG Shipping to go anywhere in the world.
Right.
So yes, that's what we have been doing. And in the 3 years since we started this venture, the response has again been very encouraging. More and more people are coming up and they want to experience what it is being at sea on a sailboat. So yes, we are giving it to the experience to anyone, and I personally feel that we need to expand this whole thing beyond the military and let the industry grow on its own, so that it's available to more people. And if it is available to more people, more participation happens, the costs also come down.
And we have the coastline to make it
We have
happen
the coastline,
also.
we have a large coastline, and we have very good climate.
Right.
We have very, very predictable climate in our areas. If you compare it, let's say, with English Channel or, say, South Africa or Australia, we don't have cold fronts coming in and, extreme temperatures and stuff. We got lovely weather. And we can continue sailing, and we got a lovely coastline, lot of small harbors along the coast, lot of coves where you can stop for the night and enjoy yourself.
Right.
So that is what we are trying to promote, not the competitive part of the sailing. Competitive sailing,
Experience.
like any sport, very few people can do or excel in, but recreational activity, any game,
And for an experience
for
of
an
a
experience,
lifetime.
yes. That is what we are hoping to promote.
Yeah. So, sir, as you know about maritime conversations, that we, a group of maritime enthusiasts, have started with Commodore Kisnur being being at the helm, so to say. Do you have any message for all those enthusiasts out there who would be watching this, and just lay people like us? Any particular message?
I think it's a wonderful idea, and it's a very nice initiative by Commodore Kesnu. The sea is everyone's. So there is nothing like a naval person or a lay person. It's for everyone, and we all need to be aware of it and be able to use it. That is what Maritime Conversations is doing, making people aware of it. I think, I'm just hoping that it will grow from strength to strength.
Thank you so much for your wishes.